fiscal face-off 6 months after Prime Minister Mark Carney was sworn in. He's finally gone head-to-head with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre in the House of Commons. The debate this week centered on primarily one thing, the Liberals' upcoming budget set now for November 4th. While the Prime Minister has said it will be both an austerity and an investment budget, he also said last week that the deficit, quote, will be substantial and higher than previously forecast. So how did the long-anticipated Carney-Poilievre matchup go, and why is the budget so front and center already? Our Sunday strategy session is here to talk about that. Kathleen Monk here in studio as a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Kory Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst, as well as former Communications Director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody.
Hey there.
Good to see you. Scott, I'll start with you. What's your take on how the matchup went?
Well, to be honest with you, the clash in the Commons between Carney and Poilievre, as anticipated as it was almost certainly the least interesting part of the week. I did not think it rose to the fanfare. They were a little bit gracious toward one another. There was a bit of humor initially, and then on to what I thought were pretty standard, pretty routine exchanges in the House. So I didn't really think that's where the action was. I was, however, quite intrigued by the kind of roller coaster messaging all week long, coming out of the government. We were talking about the deficit. We have this complicated, message track of we're going to invest even as we cut. And by the way, the deficit is going to be huge. And we're going to be trying to pursue all these major projects. I mean, it is a very complicated, in some ways, in competition with itself message track. And I think, my grandma used to say when it came to the kitchen, simplify and reduce your ingredients. I think the government needs to take Grandma Kerr's advice when it comes to baking and government messaging.
There's a bunch of examples, Kory, in that vein. First of all, the finance minister told CTV about a month ago that budget would be in October, then it's November. Last Sunday on this program, House Leader Steve McKinnon told me that, did not rule out cuts, for example, to the public service, said there had to be tough choices. A few hours later, the Prime Minister said, no, those cuts would only essentially come through attrition. Your take on the message track around the budget?
Confusing. I kind of agree with Scott. There's a lot of ingredients in that cake. I'm not sure how they're going to land that. If you look at when governments have been the most successful in terms of landing budgets, most of the work is done in advance. You're talking about what the problems are and what the sacrifices are, what the trade-offs are, why it is you need to do something. You've really got to sell a problem before you sell a solution. And I think they're kind of going at this saying, it's there's going to be cuts, but there's going to be a huge deficit. All of these conflicting messages, and they're kind of leaving out the why, which is the part that I think won them the election. They've got to talk, I think, more about the problem and the challenges facing the economy, why it is we need to do some of these things, and then have a much clearer, more concise narrative around what's going to happen. But as we saw, as you pointed out, the House leader didn't even know when the budget was coming, because on your show last week it was for sure in October, and then by Tuesday it was in November.
What do you think is behind, Kathleen, the mixed messaging or the evolving messaging? Is it the newness of the government? Is it conflict behind the scenes over actually what this budget ends up being and trying to assuage different political factions? Like, what do you think it is?
They don't have their message track correct, that's for sure. But that's because they're reacting to the Conservatives. The Conservatives have been so smart to focus on the budget. They're essentially doing a strategic pre-buttal in advance of Carney laying out his budget. He's trying to do the two things, you've explained it before, this operating budget and this capital budget. And basically the Conservatives are saying, we just want to know about the deficit number. Deficit, deficit, deficit. And while Carney's trying to talk about, fiscal arithmetic and how the math will work and these two different budgets, basically the Conservatives have a much easier narrative, and they just want to focus on that one big number. And basically they're dismantling Carney's kind of intellectual, fiscal structure that he's trying to set up before he's even had a chance to lay it out to Canadians. And that preemptive work that the Conservatives Conservatives are doing now, that basically that pre-buttal that I'm trying to say that they're trying to set up, basically makes it any kind of explanation that Carney or the Minister of Finance will try to do to try to explain how their budget will lay out, actually just like technical spin, right? And not relatable. So they're focused on the arithmetic and not the narrative, and that's the problem. They do need to set out the problem, as Kory has said, but they also have to do so quickly. And I gotta think that there's lots of people in that finance department right now that are wishing they actually put out the budget in the spring. And that would have been an easier, the numbers, the numbers would have been better. Pierre Poilievre wasn't in the House, and they could have got it through, and they wouldn't be dealing with this now.
So there's still a number of weeks before that budget on November 4th, as Kathleen mentioned, Scott, though they might be upset about that. Is there a way for the Liberals to take back the narrative around their budget, or is it too late?
Oh, of course. I mean, listen, we're speaking exhaustingly like, oh my God, the ship has sailed. In fact, it sank. Well, it hasn't. I mean, we're 4 days into, the Commons being back in session. So, I mean, I think they just need to take some advice from, people like Kory, frankly. I mean, let's start with the headline. Instead of describing the mechanics of the budget, talk about what motivates the budget, and that is protecting jobs. Why? Because of Donald Trump, the threats he poses to our economy, the threat that he poses to the global economy, the pressure that puts on us to respond. We have to spend money, we have to find savings, we have to protect industries and people. All of it is about protecting jobs for the threat that's coming and the threat that's upon us. Just focus on a simple, clean, clear message, and then the details can be inserted later. But they got to grab it by the lapels. There's lots of time to do it, and there's lots of opportunity to do it, because the Prime Minister's on TV almost every single day, either in the House of Commons or with a world leader.
Kory, you're nodding?
Yeah, I would add one more thing to that. Advertising. We've spoken so many times on this program what a mistake it was for the Trudeau government to have not done its own advertising, its own government advertising, laying out with those broad strokes of the message and the narrative work. We've seen other governments do that successfully in the past. It's, I would say, the largest tool in the government's toolkit when it comes to communications is government advertising. And it's been months since I've seen a Government of Canada ad of any variety on television. I think they're setting themselves up to repeat the same mistake of the failed Trudeau era when it comes to marketing their own government. Where are the ads? That's a huge question for me.
If I just could quickly follow up.
Blue Jays and playoffs.
Right.
Blue Jays and playoffs.
Right.
That is the time to advertise.
Makes sense. What should the ads say, Kory?
Well, I think it's something similar to what I think Scott laid out. You've got to tie these different things together. There's a threat from Trump, but then there's also the sort of major projects things, how we're essentially having to reorient our entire economy. Now, that's going to require different priorities. It means spending less on some things, spending more on other things, having to invest in long-term projects that are going to protect Canadians' employment in the longer term and protect our economy in the longer term. If we don't do these things, Canadians are going to have to get used to living in a lot poorer country, because that's what we will be on track to do.
Kathleen, your thoughts on that?
Well, he's in a problem because he's being wedged on both sides. We have the C.D. Howe Institute. We've got the parliamentary budget officer saying this deficit number is going to be through the roof. The Conservatives are clamoring for it, and it's much easier to understand. And on the left side of the spectrum, you have all of this new political and policy space being opened up that, frankly, New Democrats, other progressives are trying to lean into as well. I agree with my colleagues. I think an advertising strategy would be great if the Liberals can actually bring themselves to be putting some money behind that, which they've shown themselves not able to do over the last 10 years, let's be clear. So it would mark a noted change if Carney was to take up an advertising strategy. But he has to actually sell the notion of restraint and investment for the long term and make that narrative case and get back to tugging on those emotional heartstrings that he was so able to do in the spring of this year. And it seems kind of has faded from Canadians' memory and frankly from the talking points of the Liberal government.
I've got just a few seconds left, Scott. Your thoughts on why are there no ads, but why haven't there been?
Yeah, I think they've got to marshal the machinery of government, and they've had this sort of breakneck pace since they arrived, and a lot of it swirls around the actions, the words, and the initiatives of the Prime Minister. But there is a broader, larger government that needs to be organized, even at the political level. I'm talking about the public service. So I think they have to resource it. I think they have to headman it. And I think they have to execute on it. But it's not that difficult if you're determined.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Our Sunday strategy session. Kory Teneycke, Scott Reid, and Kathleen Monk. Coming up today, Trudeau-era exodus. Several former Trudeau ministers are on their way out of Prime Minister Mark Carney's caucus for other international and even diplomatic jobs. What does that mean, and why is it happening now? Our scrum with Hannah Thibodeau, Bob Fife, and Robert Benzie is up next. Don't go anywhere.